Yep. Good evening, everyone. So, yesterday we learned some custom hooks, how to handle them. So, after understanding about the custom hooks, we'll see once we will go into the built-in hooks. Already several built-in hooks we learned, but few points more we need to understand. So, let's see. So, we are going to learn about React built-in hooks. So React built-in hooks are nothing but React library provides some predefined hooks with them for different purpose. We can use them. They don't have a solution for every reason, and we need to design our own hooks. How to do that? Yesterday we saw. Now some rules also we learned how to use the hooks. Right? Now built-in hooks. Let's see what they have. Some important one we already learned is use effect. So what is this hook and what is its purpose? So use effect, it defines actions to perform while mounting and unmounting component. While mounting and unmounting component. Unmounting component. Actions to perform while mounting and unmounting component. Actually, when a component mounts after creation. Component object. Component mounts after creation of component object. After creation of component object. So when a component unmounts, when we are changing from one component to another. So a component will mount and it will stay until you go to next. That means component unmounts when user navigates to another component. Component unmounts when user navigates to another component. So it is going to unmount. So component mounts and unmounts. So these are two important phases. Now, how you define the mount and unmount is syntactically use effect. It uses a callback function and dependencies. So here, actions on mount. It will use a returns a callback function. So defines actions on unmount. And obviously we know at the end it will have dependencies. That is the basic syntax of use effect. So what actions on mount and what actions on unmount? Generally, what type of actions you prefer using mount? Already I explained the life cycle hook. In life cycle, I showed you that automatically some actions are performed at the time of mounting. What additional? Remember, even if you don't write a mount, component have a mount. Even when you are not writing the mount, component internally have a mount. Just like constructor. So you have a class, every class have a default constructor. If it have a default constructor, why to create another constructor? So if already class have a default constructor, why to create another constructor? Because default constructor does some default actions. You want some additional actions at the same time to perform, then you can write using a default. Same here also. Component will mount even you don't write mount, because without mounting it cannot render anything. Component will mount implicitly. If you want any additional action on mount, then you can write. What type of actions we write? Initializing value into a state, right? So generally what you define on mount phase is, so typically the mount the mount actions include the mount actions include initialization of state with new values. So loading API data, executing functions to get ready on mount. So get ready on mount, all such things. So initializing of state with values, loading API data, executing some functions which need to get ready on mount, all such activities we do on mount. What we do on unmount? Till now we haven't done anything on unmount. What we do on unmount is regularly we clean up the memory. That means we destruct the memory. So we reset the values. Whenever we want any component to use some values and it wants to reset the values, all such things we do by using what? Component unmount. Disconnecting with APIs. Sometimes some API connections are still open. We need to close those connections. All such things we do by using unmount. So here typically the unmount actions include disconnecting the subscribed methods. So usually removing event listeners. So reset the initialized values, clean up the memory, etc. All these things we do in unmount phase. The component mount and unmount. So let's see one simple point how they mount and unmount. So I will go to the project here. So here we are defining the mount. One more thing we know, what is the purpose of dependency now? What is the purpose of dependency? Every component usually mount only once. If you want the component to mount again, then we need to define dependence. In routing and others, I showed you example for that. So here one more point is the dependence, a component mounts only once. You can configure the dependencies to remount the component. You can configure the dependencies to remount the component. It mounts again when the dependency changes. When the dependency changes. So let's see. So we have a effect and demo. Effect demo.jsx. So export function effect demo. Okay. So roughly for your understanding sake, I will design everything here in one screen. So we have a button. So login. Another button is register. So, and we have a horizontal line. So we have constant component of say view, set view, use state, it is empty. Okay, now here we are defining function handle login click and another function handle register click. Actually, we are creating export function login component. Login is one component, and return just temporarily I'm creating all in one screen. You can design separate files. So this is which page login, and I will create another one, and this is register. And login component is also having use effect. In this, what we are doing is we are writing console.log. So login mounted and return. So we are configuring console.log login unmounted. That's the message. Same I will write for register also. So here register mounted and register unmounted. Okay, here we use the word register. Now on login click set view, we are loading login component. I already showed this in conditional rendering, how to render a different component on request. Here again set view is which component register. And on click handle login click. So on click handle register click. Here we want to display the view. So we want the view here. The result should come here. So let's run this component. Okay, we will make it in the startup effect demo. Okay, here we are defining effect demo. And make sure that you remove this strict mode. Because I told you once, if there is a strict mode, your application will compile 2 times. One for development, another for production. So you need to remove the strict mode so that it will run only once. Okay. Now, once it is there, let's run this. So we can open, yeah, we have login and register. Let's go to inspect and see the log. In the log, observe carefully. When I click on the login component, you can see login component mounted and it is showing the result. Now when it will unmount, it will be continuously available and mounted. It will unmount when you change another component. That means when user navigates from this component to another. So I'm going to register component. Now what will happen? First login will unmount, then register will mount. That means when I click register, 2 actions will perform. So you see when I click register, 2 actions perform. That means login unmounted, then register mounted. Now when register will unmount, again when you go to login. So that means until user changes from one component to another, the component is still available. Now I click login, then automatically register will unmount first, then it will go to the login. So generally what developers do when they are working with real backend API, they want to disconnect the connections. They want to clean up the memory. They want to reset the memories. Such all interactions we perform by using this unmount phase. On mount phase already we done. On unmount we do all such things. We can try that later when we design one another project. I will show you. We will connect with real database and server side logic and create our own APIs. Usually for that you need a knowledge of any server side technology, but we will see a basic introduction to Node.js, Node.js, Express.js, MongoDB. Just overview I will give you, because you need to learn some server side technologies to design a complete end-to-end application, creating APIs, connecting with database, maintaining data in database. That's not React's job. That's all backend technology. But I will show you one project here, one small application. Now, in that, whenever we are connecting, we are disconnecting, we have to clean up the memories. All such activities we define on which phase? Unmount. That is good because it is going to improve the performance of application. Any unused connections are disconnected. Any unused memory is cleaned up. So it will not create burden for application. So we had defined such actions on which phase? Unmount. So this is one simple example showing you mount and unmount. Already we written lot of logics in so many examples when we designed our components in mount phase. Okay. I showed dependencies also na, how dependencies will change when you are working with use effect in routing and other example I showed that. So this is one point. I will keep one example here. I will put one example. This is so effect demo dot what JSX. In this example, just I am showing the components mounting and unmounting, how they actually happen. Now here, some one important question is that means the frequently asked questions relative to this. So when you are working with use effect, what are the frequently asked questions here? So the frequently asked questions when you are working with use effect is, first basic question is, can we define multiple mount phases for a component? That is one common question for interviews. Can we define multiple mount phases? Multiple, more than one. That means in another uh, question, same point, another way is, can you write multiple use effects in a component? You have one use effect. Can we have multiple use effects? Just like, for example, in a class you have a constructor. Can we have multiple constructors? Yes. In JavaScript, we cannot have. In JavaScript, you can have only one explicit constructor, but in other languages, they support constructor overloading. Na? They support constructor overloading. So technically, how we need to manage? So why you need to have multiple constructors? In your suppose Java or .NET or somewhere you are having OOP language, you can have more than one constructor. What is the necessity? How you will explain that? Why you need multiple constructors? How you will explain that in an interview? Huh? Means how we should answer it. What should be the answer in our interviews? What technical words you need to tell? What is that called as? What is that known as? Overloading, na? That means we can overload the object's functionality, right? Generally, an object can do any specific task. And if you overload the object's memory, then what will happen? It can do different tasks. It can exhibit polymorphism. Na? That means an object can use multiple memories. That means, in OOP languages, later in TypeScript, I will show. Can we create a derived class object using the memory of multiple base classes? Can we create an object for derived class which uses the memory of base class? In OOPS, can we create an object for derived class that uses the memory of base class? It's not possible. Why it is not possible? Because what is OOP rule? Inheritance rule. First, base class constructor should execute, then derived class constructor. Na? Am I right? You know the inheritance rule. Na? When you create an object for derived class, which constructor will be called first? Base class constructor will be called, then followed by derived. If a base class constructor is unable to call, then your inheritance will fail. Inheritance will fail. When you are creating a derived class object using the memory of base class, means you are trying to call derived class constructor before base class constructor, which is not possible. But you can create a base class object using the memory of derived class, which I will show. We will see in TypeScript. If you haven't learned that in general OOP, you will learn that. To learn polymorphism like concepts, you will know. Later in TypeScript, I will show. That means one base class object can use the memory of multiple derived class. What is the advantage of doing that is one object can have several behaviors. They can work for different situations. In one situation, one work, another situation, another. Similarly, later in TypeScript, I will show that. Similarly, here, when you are working with component, it can have multiple use effects with different dependencies. What is advantage of that? When one dependency changes, component will do one work. Another dependency changes, component can do another work. Because you learned that component can conditionally render different. Na? We saw now. We saw that component can render completely different. We designed also, na? In which example we designed, I think in controlled components. In controlled components, we designed a data grid. Here we designed a nav bar. In the nav bar, you saw here, it is checking the condition. Based on that, it is returning. Na? If condition is matching, it can do one work. Not matching, it can do another work. It can return two different. So a component can be defined with multiple use effects. A component can be defined with multiple use effects. That means you can define here. So one use effect, here I can define another use effect. And very important is This can have a dependency called, for example, some cookies changed. Am I right? But actually in this example, we don't have. First, we will learn this and we will put in the project. We design project now. We can do lot of changes in that, but so much we have to change. All the strategy till now we learned, we have to little bit replace that. I will show how do we do that. For example, this login is expecting, it is expecting cookies. So let's say props, am I right? Suppose here, whenever the props changes, props, it should affect. That means what is difference between two components? This is so normal and login unmounted normal, normal and login unmounted with what? Props. This login mounted with what? Props. Like this we are defining. Now what is the concept here is, whenever we access this, for example, it is returning. So it is returning. Here we are returning. You can refresh here. You can see when I click login, and you can see that login normal mounted and with props also mounted. There is no problem. Not only that, later we can do in such a way that only one will load according to situation. For that, we need conditional rendering now. That means you can tell when props change, only props mount. Props related use effect should mount. If props are not mentioned, then mount which one? Normal. So in interview, the question is, can we have multiple use effects? Yes, we can have multiple use effects. Why you need multiple use effects? Actually, they will ask one more question like, why you do that? You can write the dependencies here because array is multiple dependency na. But actually, what is our intention? Conditionally mount on different dependencies. When you mention dependencies, conditional mounting cannot happen. Conditional mounting can be managed by using what? With dependencies, without dependence. So we can have multiple. We can have multiple. For example, if it is props.id, that means some ID is passed. So here it is using props. Just roughly, I will put here. I'm not designing the complete because later I will show that this is props dot what ID. That means now here the component is mounted. We are mounting the component here. Actually, here I will use one ID as 2. That means we are defining ID 2 because props have an ID property here. And you can see now I refresh. When I click login, it is saying normal and props with this ID. That means it is able to access and do that. And remember, later in future, whenever ID changes, whenever the ID changes, only this will load na. Will the first one load? First one will not load. Which one will load? Second one will. That means loading of component will happen on ID change. First one will not mount. For that, I need to write routing, pass the values and do something, which we will do in another point. But this is very regular question asked in interviews. So what is that? Can we have multiple mount phases for a component? Yes. You can define multiple use effects in a component. Then the question is why we need multiple use effects in a component. To render and define various actions to render and define various actions on mount. So you can conditionally mount different actions for a component. For a component, you can conditionally mount different actions for a component. That is one important. So this is one point you should know. After learning these hooks, I will show this practically implemented in our to-do application. Right? You practiced, you tried that application, right? So if you are not practicing that application and you come up with some doubts, what will happen now, what will happen later, I will not answer your doubts, because I need to see what you have done practically, then I will check. Right? So you need to do that practically. And if you have issues, then you need to come. Without doing it, just imagination and the doubts, that's all nonsense. We will not consider them. I will not even check also. I will not consider, because when you practice and you have some issues in that, then I will check. Right? Simply without doing anything, you come up with questions, I will not answer. That will be very reasonable, because what to answer to people who don't practice? Nothing. Right? So if you're done, then we can see what you have done and we can suggest you some suggestions in that. We'll do, because in the next project, I will just give you overview. I will not write all code. You have to write everything, because here I written all of them. Next level, I will just show the flow. You need to do everything. You have to try. Okay. So first you finish this, because in after this, we will put all these in the project. In the to do application, we will keep it. So earlier, what we know about use effect, and now what you know about use effect, little different. Right? What new you learned is how unmount is used. What are the new things about use effect? This is one built-in hook that we were using from so many days. Okay. Next, what is another built-in hook we are using? Another built-in hook you have used is use state. What is purpose of use state? What is the purpose of use state? I already told you this in the beginning. So what is the purpose of use state? Because why can't you use a variable? Because the component data must be mutable and variables are immutable. You cannot change their structure. So it is not recommended to store data in variables for a component to use across requests. So if you want to store some data and use for a component across requests, then it is recommended by using which one? So it is recommended by using use state. It maintains a local state for your component. Already state is created. We are using the local state. It uses a local state for the component so that we can store any value and use across requests. But what is the limit? What is the limit of data in use state? It is not accessible to child components. Is it accessible to child components? No. The state of a component is not accessible to others. It is not accessible to its child also. So it is only for that component. That is the reason for accessibility to child. What we have done, we used context now. So use context, use state, all these are related to state management. So what is use state is nothing but it uses the component local state created for component created for component. It uses the component local state created for component. So created for component. So it is mutable and accessible across requests in a component. It is mutable and accessible across requests in a component. It is not accessible to child components. It is not accessible to child components. So it is destroyed when component changes. When component navigates to another component. So it is destroyed when component navigates to another component. So state is available only for that component until that component is there, until the component is mounted. Once the component is unmounted, the state allocated for the component is destroyed. So anything you stored in the state is not accessible to child components and it is not accessible to another component also. It is only for that particular component, right? And you saw it is a memory that can handle any type of data. So primitive, non-primitive types, any type of data. It is a memory that can handle any type of data. It can handle any type of data. Now, syntactically, we already know constant. So we have get and set. Use state and you can have a value. State uses a getter to read and return value. It uses a setter to reinitialize a new value. To reinitialize a new value. And you go through the notes I given in the beginning while learning about state. I given so many FAQs also related to that. So many questions I given. Here I am not giving those questions again. In interview, what questions are asked, already those questions are there in our previous notes. That means refer to your previous notes. Okay. What questions? Remembered any of them? So many years back we learnt. Uh, you remembered those questions? I given some questions like why we should use const for state, why not var and let. Remembered? Because you will put the same faces again before interviewer also. Like you never learnt about them. Huh? You never heard about them. We discussed now. So why to use const? Why not var and let? Now don't read the answer. Tell me just what you remembered. So it is mandatory that state must be initialized. Without initializing, you cannot use the state. Initialization is mandatory. If we use var and let will work, state will work, no problem. But it will lead to bugs. Why it will lead to bugs? Because they can be assigned. State will not be good in assignment. And let and var can allow assignment. So that is the reason we use only const. Right? Then another question is like if it is const, then how you will set? Constant cannot set na. So it is not constant is not assigning value. It is reinitializing the value. Am I right? It will not assign the value. It will reinitialize the values. So these points, and I told you that we can handle any type of data. Any primitive, non-primitive type, any type of data we can handle, right? That's already we learned about use state. Now, the memory related only, another important that you already learned is use context hook. So what is the purpose of use context? It will not create context, it will use context. For that first, so already you know detailedly I given so many points here, just overview, because all hooks at one place we will put for your reference. Okay, so it uses context memory, context memory created for a component. It uses context memory created for a component. And we discussed that why we need context memory and what is context memory. Even it is available in general web applications. Every page have a context memory. The context memory is the memory of a page which is accessible to the other pages which run inside the page. That means actually here why we discussed this point, for which solution we learned this, for a problem called props drilling, right? To avoid props drilling, we have to use the context. So I'm not giving all detail, which already you have. I'm just giving the point. It is a solution. So for props drilling, it is a solution for props drilling. So It makes the memory of a component accessible to its child components at any level, at any level of hierarchy, at any level of hierarchy. At any level of hierarchy. So context memory so that you can access at any level of hierarchy. Child, nested childs, anywhere we can access. Just basic syntax I will give. So constant first let context name is equal to create context. And we have to use context and context name. And you need a context and a provider na. So context name, what is this? This is nothing but context scope na. So context scope for child components. So I told you that all, make sure that all child components are inside the context provider. They must be inside the context provider. This all we already discussed. Several questions also I given for them, check in the context. So this is the context memory. And while working with this context memory, we discussed that you can carry data from child to parent na, by using what? How? How we can carry data from child to parent? By using custom events. We saw that we can create our own events. Through that event, we can trigger the data from child to parent. I showed you an example for that. Right. Here in our to-do application where we can use context. For example, in dashboard, you are filtering data. Filtering is present in the main component. Filtering options are present. The filtering results must be shown below. The results will be in a controlled component, but controlled component is controlled by using props. If it is not a controlled component, then how you pass the data? By using what? Context. Filter value, sorting value, searching value, we will pass from parent to child. I showed you already in shopping app. We can transport from parent to child and it will get that and it will use. Child to parent also I showed you add to cart. I showed example. Na? So add to cart, it will send from child to parent. We can create our own custom events and we can trigger the data. So this is another one for memory. Use state and use context. These are for memory. Next one is you learned one more important is use ref na. use ref. Here also detailedly I explained the point. So what is this? It configures a reference memory. It configures a reference memory. It is intended to use in a process, in a background process. It can store value and provide without re-render, because we used in form also na. I told you that in form how to collect the data from forms by using use ref. So it can store value and provide without re-render. So that you can do by using use ref. Use ref. So use reference, already we discussed that. In two occasions I told you, while working with debounce and throttle, and while working with form, I have shown you how to use reference. Debounce means timeout na. Throttle means interval. How do we use them? How to store them in memory? How to cancel them? For that we used this use reference. So in form also I showed you syntactically, just I will give constant. Suppose here we are having you sorry, this is what some thread is equal to. So use ref, and you can define what? So we can define some null. So actually you can't use constant. So better always use which one? LET. Why? Because we need to assign thread dot what? Current is equal to what value. If it is a constant, it will not allow assignments. So it can have a value or it can have a function. You can store anything inside. I'm not giving any examples because already we know them, right? And we will put these in our application also. I will show some example where to fit them. Some other I will just give you suggestion. You have to try them. I will say that for this purpose use ref, you should try and show me. If you can do by yourself, that's good. Okay. And what else? Another important here is in the memories. That means while working with the state, when you are dealing with the state, another important is use memo. Another important is use memo. Use memo. What is this use memo hook? Why we need this use memo is actually, so use memo will configure a cache memory. In that cache memory, you can store some data so that if the same data is requested across multiple requests within a fraction of time, it will not again get from the server. It will not mount your component again. Without mounting, without re-rendering the component, it will bring from the cache and it will use from the cache. That means if any data is not updated, and the same data is used for various action. For example, what you done, there are some appointments in to do. You want to read the appointments and you want to print them, that you are doing in dashboard already. When the appointments are loaded, user will perform operations like filtering, sorting, searching appointments. And the appointments that are loaded, they are not changing. We are not adding any new appointment. We are not deleting appointment. Just we are filtering, sorting. But when you are filtering, sorting, searching appointments which are already loaded, every time after filter, after search, it will get from the actual API again. That means when you filter, the fresh list will again come from where the API requests. That's burden to application. If data is not changing and it is already loaded, then don't make a request to server again. You have to just work on the data which is already loaded until it is changed. Then we can put that in which memory, a cache memory, and you can allocate that memory by using what? Use memo. Use memo allocates a memory. It stores your data and it will provide the data available across multiple requests without fetching it from the server. It will give it from the buffer. What is advantage of that? It saves round trips. Generally in web technology, you learned what is round trip. No? Round trip means when a client requests anything, the requested information is always served from the server. Then it is called round trip. How to save round trip? We can cache. We can keep it in memory for some time so that again when they request, it will get from the cache. It will save round trip. So what is the purpose of use memo? It allocates a memory. It allocates a memory to store data. It allocates a memory to store data. So memory is a cache. Memory is a cache updated only when any change occurred, or you can say when any dependency changes. Memory is a cache updated only when any dependency changes. So it provides data across multiple requests. It provides data across multiple requests without re-rendering. It provides data across requests without re-rendering. Then you may ask like, what is difference between useref and use memo? Useref also avoids re-render, na? But useref will not update whenever dependency changes. Use memo will update whenever dependency changes, right? So it avoids round trips. It avoids round trips. So round trip is the process of requesting content every time from server. Round trip is the process of requesting content every time from server. Requesting every time from server. Actually, how this works? Use memo is just like use memo is just like use effect. What it is going to do is it is going to define and return some data, and it is going to have dependency. And actually, if it is returning the data, we can capture the returned data where data is equal to use memo. That's how people do that. They can access the data and use the data. So the data is in the memory. The data is in the memory. And whenever any dependency changes, this data updates. Now, what you can do on this data, you can find, am I right? You can filter, you can what? Sort, you can do all type of activities on the data. So what is the specialty of that? It is a cached data. It is cache. So it is going to cache the data. Now, if you want to cache a data and use it across requests, then you can use which one? Use memo. You can cache a function also. For example, you have login click. When you perform login click, it is creating cookies. It is allocating memory. That should not reallocate again and again until you sign out. That means the same memory should continue. That means what you can do, you can cache the functions also. Not only caching the data, you can cache entire function so that the function will remain same across multiple requests, and the function also will avoid re-render. Whenever user clicks login again, it will not get from the server, it will get from the cache. That means even the functions can be cached, and that is done by using use callback. We have same like use memo, another hook called use callback. What is difference between use memo and use callback? Use memo will store data and use callback will store a function. I will show you in example also how to do that. So the another one related to this is, so it is use callback. Both are same. So it is same as use memo. It is same as memo. Memo can memorize the data. Memo can memorize the data. Keep in cache. Callback can keep a function in memory. Callback can keep a function in memory. You can execute function without re-render. It can update when dependency changes. It can update when dependency changes. Syntax is same. Use callback also same, but difference here is this also have dependency. Same like use effect, both will be there. For example, suppose we have a constant, so login click. Generally, we use a normal function. This time we use a use callback function. And here we can do set cookie. Just roughly I am giving other actions on login. Then here dependency is cookies. That means this entire functionality is attached to button on click is equal to which one? Login click. This time login click is not an ordinary function. It is a callback function. It is a cached function, right? So majority in production level, we prefer all the functions that deal with memory to be with callbacks. Use callback. So use memo and use callback. Now we will see how to put this in our to-do app. And we have now some more options like reducer, use reducer. Now we will see one more library called Redux. How to use that Redux in our application. That we'll see tomorrow. In tomorrow's session, we are going to learn how to put this in our project, and we will learn some more important hooks and some very important concept called reducer. That is, in the next hook, we will discuss about that. We are going to learn about a hook called use reducer. We are going to see how to use this use reducer. That we'll see in next session. Tomorrow we'll continue. And tomorrow we are going to learn one very important concept called Redux. Why it is used, why it is needed. It is related to reducer. Reducer at small level, Redux at high level for state management. That will continue. Okay, right. Thank you.